Hello, I'm Alisa Stovall, a consultant with the Indiana IEP Resource Center. I'm here at our 2017 Research to Practice Conference. I'm here with Sarah Ward, one of the presenters at our conference, and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We are pleased to have you here and sharing your expertise. We've talked with some of your colleagues and other presenters about the impact of research on educators and the fact that it really should be driving what we're doing. So is there anything coming or current in the research in regards to executive function, the work that you're doing that could maybe lead to some new practices for us in the classroom?
Sure. I think there's probably two really big new things with the research. Of course, with our 360 Thinking program, we really define executive function as not merely organize your backpack and sort of record your homework, but it's this whole concept around the fact that we are always envisioning the future, and we sort of see ourselves in the future and imagine, okay, what is something going to look like, and if that's what my paper is going to look like, if that's what my project's going to look like, let me work my way backwards towards what is it that I need to do to make it look like that. I think something that's very interesting in the research, though, is two components of that future thinking. First of all, one of the ideas is that as I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you, we could say I'm present Sarah, that's me in the moment, and I know that, for example, I have to run some errands this afternoon, I have to do some work this afternoon. So what I'm envisioning is future Sarah. So I'm here, but future Sarah is going to be at Target and moving around Target, and future Sarah is going to be writing some paragraphs to a grant. What's very interesting, though, is when we look at that, that means that I have to be able to have theory of mind of my future self. I have to be able to take perspective of, well, how will my future self feel? Will I feel rushed? Will I feel tired? Gee, if I'm going to feel tired, then maybe I ought to eat something with a great protein to give me a little bit of energy, and I ought to have a little cup of coffee. And if I want more time to write the grant, then I should spend less time in Target. What's very interesting, though, and the research shows now, is that many of our students who are very intelligent and very bright, but may have a little bit of a spectrum disorder. In fact, some of those kids, we know one of their greatest challenge is theory of mind and perspective taking. So all of a sudden, we find ourselves in this strange experience where we're telling students to imagine, and I'm holding up my thought bubble, which will your future self be like, but we're finding some of those kids don't have the ability to actually have theory of mind of their future self. So we're asking them to consider, what is that going to look like? How are you going to feel? And they can't figure out what that's going to be like. And I think that's a really big reason why so many of those students struggle with novelty. All of a sudden you say to them, hey, here's a change, we're going to go to an assembly, or gee, why don't we try out this new restaurant? I don't want to go. I don't want to do that. Or they're so overwhelmed because they can't take theory of mind. So the first new research that we're really looking at is, how do we teach students to have perspective taking of their future self? And the second key thing is the distance from where you are to how far in the future you can see is called the temporal spatial window. And so you can imagine if something is farther away, like let's say you're planning a 4th of July barbecue. Well, I mean, hey, that's in July, and so right now you're like, yeah, I'm having a barbecue, and you can kind of have a fuzzy idea. But it isn't until that's maybe 2 weeks or a week away that you actually see the party and the decorations, the food, the gifts that, or the guests that you're going to invite, etc. And we know that high schoolers, believe it or not, their temporal horizon is only 2 days. Isn't that fascinating? Wow. So all of a sudden you look at, teachers who are saying, here's a 3-month research project. Here's a sophomore writing project that's supposed to last for 4 months. Or, prepare for your midterm exam, which is 3 weeks away. Well, we're actually asking students to do something which neurologically their brain isn't developed to do. So we have to do some things, and that's why research is important. It changes our scope of how do we address and provide assignments and break down those assignments so that we're matching their sort of developmental spatial temporal horizon, and we can help those students take theory of mind of their future self.
So are there strategies that we can teach kids or model or somehow help them grow into a longer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We want to really be able to do that. So here's just like, say, for example, a really quick example. When we look at long-term projects, a classic IEP goal. The student will break long-term projects down into smaller, more manageable parts. We've all heard that goal. And what we'll see is teachers will say, and I did that, and they write a bunch of deadlines on a calendar. But the challenge is when you write a deadline, which says, read chapter 1, write a paragraph, in fact, that's a verbal working memory. It's not an image of what that would look like. So the big thing that we do is we convert the words to these visual images. So I might have a picture of a paragraph of what a paragraph would look like. I might have if say for example I have to make a poster, I might have a small little sketch of what the elements of the poster include. Because now when I see those pieces sort of laid out on like a monthly calendar, all of a sudden I can visualize and see the volume of work, and it makes it not merely be a word of something I'm going to do in 2 days, but I can see what that project is going to look like.
So you can create the action steps to get there.
That's exactly right. And we don't glue them. We have students move them around so that they can prioritize them and say, okay, well, gee, if I don't have enough information to write the introductory paragraph, let me flip-flop that with this part where I could see that I could actually start printing out a map of a country for a poster or something like that.
And then discovering that, oh, this is going to take longer, and this piece isn't going to take quite so long. So
right. And you're moving it. There's no student that will erase and rewrite. There is no student that's going to simply erase that step and move it forward. So when you have it as, pieces on a project planning board that they can actually physically move it, now they're doing that future thinking. What will it look like? What will I look like? How am I moving to achieve that goal? So it really makes a big difference.
And then that can grow into other skills.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's something, again, I love that phrase, beneficial to all, essential to some. We all do this. This is not limited to students with special education-based challenges. We all have to do this.
Absolutely.
I have my own touch of executive dysfunction.
We're all somewhere
right.
in the mix.
That's right.
Well, are there any other things that you're currently working on or projects or anything that...
Yeah, so something I'm really excited about. My co-director, Kristen Jacobson, and I, one of the things that is a real frustration in the world of executive function is, in fact, there are very few to absolutely, in many cases, no standardized measures of executive function. So when we give a student a WISC or an intelligence test, what we're actually measuring is cognitive skills that the executive system uses. So I might measure working memory, which the cognitive system, the executive system uses. I might measure your reasoning skills, but we really don't have good measures. Now, there are a few, like the Dallas-Kaplan executive function test, that's good. So Kristen and I have developed an informal assessment of executive function, which is really fascinating. So it's not just based upon organization of content and information. It measures a number of things. It measures a student's nonverbal working memory, what they have the ability to visualize. It measures a student's temporal spatial window, so how far into the future across space and time they can plan and see. It measures their ability to plan a task and to actually work backwards to complete the steps of a task independently without any direction. So we want to see how well they can do that. It measures their emotional sense and their temporal capacity to evaluate how long things will take, but also what is their emotional connection to time. So some of the questions will say, I worry about being late, or it doesn't matter to me if I'm late. Because some people, they're very, very anxious. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be late. And then there are other people like, whatever, hey, I'm late, it doesn't matter. Or I feel worried when I don't have enough time to do things. Or it'll say questions like, if I don't get around to doing something, that's okay. I know I have time to do it later. So we look at their emotional connection to time and task. And then the last little part around it, which is very fascinating, is that gesture is actually an outgrowth of how we mentally simulate activities. I mean, even as I'm talking to you, you see my hands flying around. We gesture, and it's so fascinating when people talk about it. If you think about it, if somebody says, well, they moved the event forward, they tend to gesture forward. And I go, gosh, you know what? They pushed back the time for we tend to push back. When people talk about their plans, they'll say, well, I'm going to drive and I'm going to pick up my son and come back home, and then I was going to get dinner on the table, and then I need to get everybody in bed. And you notice I'm tapping like everybody, like tapping all the little heads. It's fascinating. When you look at some students, especially, again, those groups of students with spectrum disorders, they don't gesture. And so we also informally evaluate how effectively can students utilize gesture as a means towards this nonverbal working memory planning. And it's amazing to watch kids do this. It's really fascinating. So
sounds like it.
I'm excited about it. I think it's giving teachers and evaluators a physical tool and some data to say, aha, that's what we need to work on that student doesn't have, that will ultimately then in turn translate to their ability to help students pack backpacks and record homework and get the homework home and all those pieces. So
well, we'll look forward to having that tool available.
Well, and I always say to people, right now it's informal, and we're taking measures. So anybody who wants to email us and wants a copy of it, just email it. We'll send it out to you. Administer it to your students. We love the feedback. What are you finding? That's just open source right now because we're really looking for some feedback and support too. So
well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that,
so nice
and
to
again
be here.
for being with us.
Great conference, and thanks again.